I knew something was off when I woke up to the sound of construction equipment rumbling through my backyard at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. My name is Adrian Pierce, and I had moved into the Meadowbrook Estate subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona just 6 months earlier. The neighborhood was one of those pristine cookie-cutter communities where every lawn looked magazine-ready and the HOA rules were thicker than the phone book. I had read through them before buying, thinking I understood what I was getting into. I was wrong. The construction noise pulled me out of bed, and I stumbled to my bedroom window still half asleep. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were workers swarming all over my backyard, but they were not on my property exactly. They were on my neighbor's side, but something about the placement looked wrong. Very wrong. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt and rushed outside barefoot. The Arizona morning sun was already heating up the concrete, but I barely noticed as I marched toward the activity. My neighbor, Wendy Kensington, stood there in full HOA president regalia, which basically meant she was wearing khaki capris, a visor, and clutching a clipboard like it was Excalibur itself. She was maybe 55, with that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. "What's going on here?" I called out, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Wendy turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Good morning, Adrian. I'm having a deck installed. Is not it going to be lovely? I've been planning this for months." I looked at the wooden frame they were already constructing. It was massive, easily 20 feet wide and extending back at least 15 feet from her house. But the positioning made my stomach drop. The deck seemed to be jutting way too far toward my property line. "Wendy, that looks like it is coming onto my yard," I said, trying to keep my voice level. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass. "Oh, Adrian, do not be silly. I had everything measured out perfectly. This is completely within my property boundaries." "I do not think so," I said firmly. "I had a survey done when I bought this place. That deck looks like it is at least 3 feet over the property line." Wendy's smile froze on her face. "Are you questioning my judgment? As HOA president, I have access to all the original plat maps and surveys. I know exactly where the property lines are." "Then you should know that deck is on my property," I shot back. One of the construction workers, a weathered man in his 40s with a tool belt slung low on his hips, approached us cautiously. "Madam, we need to confirm the placement before we go any further. Do you have the survey stakes marked?" Wendy waved her hand dismissively. "I told you where to build. Just follow my instructions." I felt my jaw clench. "Hold on. You all need to stop construction right now until we can verify the actual property line. I am not giving permission for any structure on my land." Wendy turned on me, her face reddening. "You cannot just halt my construction project, Adrian. I have permits from the county, HOA approval, and I have paid these workers good money to be here today." "HOA approval?" I almost laughed. "You are the HOA president. Did you just approve your own project?" Her eyes narrowed. "I have a board. We voted on it." "A board that you control," I said. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling a surveyor right now." Wendy stepped closer to me. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, some floral scent that was too strong for 7 in the morning. "If you interfere with my project, I will have no choice but to fine you for obstructing HOA-approved improvements." "You are threatening to fine me for protecting my own property?" I felt my temper rising. "That is not how any of this works." The construction foreman cleared his throat. "Look, folks, we cannot proceed if there is a property dispute. We need clear documentation before we continue." Wendy whirled on him. "You are under contract. You will finish this job or I will sue you for breach." The foreman looked between us and sighed. "Lady, I am not building on disputed property. That is asking for a lawsuit. We're going to pack up until you two sort this out." "You will do no such thing," Wendy snapped. "I am ordering you to continue." "And I am ordering you to stop," I interjected. "This is my property you are building on." The foreman made a decision. "We are done here until this gets resolved. Boys, pack it up." Wendy's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You cannot do this to me. I will report you to the Better Business Bureau. I will leave reviews everywhere. You will never work in Scottsdale again." The foreman just shook his head and walked away, barking orders to his crew. They started breaking down their equipment and loading it back onto their trucks. The whole process took about 30 minutes, during which Wendy stood there trembling with rage, and I went back inside to start making phone calls. My first call was to the surveyor who had done my initial property survey when I bought the house. His name was Marcus Chen, and he had been thorough and professional. When I explained the situation, he agreed to come out that afternoon to verify the property lines. My second call was to a real estate attorney. I had a sinking feeling I was going to need one. By the time Marcus arrived at 3 that afternoon, Wendy had left about a dozen notes on my door, each one more threatening than the last. They ranged from promises of HOA fines to vague legal threats. I saved every single one. Marcus was in his early 40s, efficient and no nonsense. He brought out his equipment and started taking measurements, checking against the county records and the original survey he had done 6 months earlier. I stood on my back porch watching, while Wendy watched from her own porch like a hawk. After an hour of careful work, Marcus came up to me with his findings. "Well, Adrian, you were right. That deck she was trying to build would have extended 3 feet and 2 inches onto your property." 3 feet, I repeated, feeling vindicated but also exhausted. "Can you document this?" "Already doing it," he said. "I will have a full report with photos and measurements ready by Monday morning. You will also want to file this with the county to make sure there is official record of the dispute." "What do I do about her?" I asked, gesturing toward Wendy, who was now talking animatedly on her phone. Marcus grimaced. "Get a lawyer, document everything, and do not let her bully you into backing down. I have seen people lose property rights because they did not stand up for themselves." After Marcus left, I thought Wendy might come over to discuss the findings. She did not. Instead, I received an official-looking letter in my mailbox that evening. It was from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, signed by Wendy in her capacity as president. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 for interfering with approved HOA improvements and causing a disturbance in the community. I read the letter twice, barely believing what I was seeing. She was actually trying to fine me for stopping her from building on my property. That evening, I contacted every member of the HOA board I could find. There were 5 members total, including Wendy. I managed to reach 3 of them by phone or email. Their responses were illuminating. Board member 1, a retired dentist named Harold, seemed genuinely surprised by the situation. "I thought Wendy's deck was entirely on her own property. She showed us plans, but now that you mention it, she did not show us a current survey." Board member 2, a woman named Patricia who worked in real estate, was more blunt. "Wendy pushes things through board meetings so fast we barely have time to review them. She presents something, says it is urgent, and we vote. I'm not surprised she cut corners on this." Board member 3, a younger guy named James who had only recently moved to the neighborhood, was the most helpful. "I voted against her deck project, actually. Something felt off about it. But Wendy, Harold, and the 5th member outvoted me. I think you should request an emergency board meeting to present your survey findings." I spent Sunday preparing my case. I gathered the original survey from when I bought the house, Marcus's new report, photos showing the construction site and its proximity to my yard, and all of Wendy's threatening notes. I also researched Arizona property law and HOA regulations until my eyes hurt. Monday morning, I called the attorney I had contacted over the weekend. Her name was Rachel Morrison, and she specialized in property disputes and HOA law. Her office was in downtown Scottsdale, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Rachel was younger than I expected, maybe in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a sharper wit. She listened to my story, reviewed my documentation, and then leaned back in her chair. "This is pretty cut and dry," she said. "She tried to build on your property without permission. That is trespassing and potentially criminal, depending on how far she pushed it. The fact that she is HOA president does not give her special rights to ignore property lines." "What about this fine she hit me with?" I asked, showing her the letter. Rachel actually laughed. "This is garbage. You cannot be fined for protecting your property rights. In fact, this could be considered harassment. I am going to draft a cease and desist letter to her and the HOA board, and we are going to demand an immediate meeting to address this." "How long will that take?" "I can have the letter ready by end of business today. But Adrian, I need to warn you. People like Wendy do not back down easily. This could get ugly before it gets better. It is already ugly, I said. Rachel drafted a comprehensive cease and desist letter that afternoon. It outlined the property line violation, demanded that Wendy abandon any plans to build within 3 feet of my property, demanded the retraction of the bogus fine, and requested an emergency HOA board meeting within 7 days. The letter also put the HOA on notice that any retaliation against me would result in immediate legal action. I hand-delivered copies to every board member that evening. Wendy's copy I left in her mailbox, though I was tempted to nail it to her front door. The next morning, Tuesday, I woke to find that someone had filed a formal complaint with the HOA against me for failure to maintain yard appearance. My yard looked fine. This was clearly retaliation, and it was clearly from Wendy. I documented everything and forwarded it to Rachel, who added it to our growing file. Wednesday brought another development. I received a call from the county zoning office. Apparently, Wendy had filed a complaint claiming that I had an unpermitted structure on my property. The structure in question was a small tool shed that had been there when I bought the house and was well within code requirements. I spent 3 hours dealing with a county inspector who came out, verified that the shed was permitted and legal, and closed the complaint. The inspector, a tired-looking man named George, shook his head as he was leaving. "Let me guess," he said. "HOA dispute?" "How did you know?" "Because I get these bogus complaints all the time from HOA presidents trying to make their neighbors' lives miserable. Document everything and get a lawyer if you have not already." "Already done," I assured him. Thursday was quiet, which made me nervous. Wendy's car was in her driveway, but I did not see her outside at all. I used the time to reach out to other neighbors, asking if they had ever had issues with Wendy or the HOA. The responses were enlightening and disturbing. Out of the 20 houses on my street, I managed to speak with residents from 12 of them. 8 had stories about Wendy abusing her power as HOA president. There was the couple who had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of beige on their shutters, the family who had been threatened with legal action because their kid's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the approved height, the elderly man who had been hit with daily fines because a windstorm damaged his fence and he could not afford to repair it immediately. By Friday, I had a coalition forming. Several neighbors agreed to attend the emergency board meeting and speak out against Wendy's behavior. Some of them had never stood up to her before out of fear, but my situation had galvanized them. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the community center. Rachel advised me to stay calm, present facts, and let the evidence speak for itself. Saturday arrived with oppressive Arizona heat. The community center's air conditioning was working overtime as people filed in. I was shocked to see at least 30 residents show up, far more than typically attended board meetings. Word had spread about the property line dispute, and people were interested. Wendy sat at the head table with the other board members, looking composed but tense. She avoided eye contact with me as I took a seat in the front row, Rachel beside me. The meeting started with standard HOA business, but everyone knew why we were really there. Finally, after 15 minutes of procedural discussion, Harold called for new business. "I believe Adrian Pierce has requested time to address the board regarding a property dispute," Harold said, glancing at his notes. I stood up and Rachel handed me a folder with all my documentation. "Thank you. As most of you know, last Saturday I prevented construction of a deck that was being built 3 feet onto my property. I've since had a licensed surveyor verify the property lines, and I have documentation proving that the proposed deck would have violated my property rights." I passed copies of the survey to each board member and put up photos on the community center's projector screen. The images clearly showed where the construction had started and how it overlapped onto my land. "Furthermore," I continued, "after I stopped this illegal construction, I was fined $500 by the HOA for interfering with approved improvements. I've also been subject to multiple retaliatory complaints and harassment." Wendy stood up abruptly. "This is slander. I did nothing wrong. I had every right to build that deck." "On your own property, yes," Rachel interjected smoothly. "But Mr. Pierce's survey clearly shows you were building on his land." "That survey is wrong," Wendy snapped. "I have the original plat maps." "Then please present them," Rachel said calmly. Wendy faltered. "I do not have them with me." "Convenient," someone muttered from the audience. Harold cleared his throat. Wendy, did you have a current survey done before starting this construction project? I did not need one, Wendy said, her voice rising. I know where my property ends. Clearly you do not, Patricia said sharply. Adrian has provided professional survey documentation. What do you have? Wendy's face was turning red again. I have been HOA president for 8 years. I've never had my judgment questioned like this. Maybe you should have been, called out a voice from the audience. It was Mrs. Chen, the woman who had been fined over her shutters. I am tired of you abusing your position. Suddenly the room erupted. Neighbor after neighbor stood up to share stories of Wendy's overreach, her arbitrary fines, her bullying tactics. It was like a dam had broken. James, the board member who had voted against the deck project, looked shocked. Harold and Patricia exchanged uncomfortable glances. Wendy tried to shout over the crowd, "This is out of order. I will not be attacked in my own meeting." "It is not your meeting," Harold said firmly. "It is the HOA's meeting, and I think we need to address some serious concerns about how you have been running things." Rachel stood up. "I would like to formally request that the board vote to rescind the fine against Adrian Pierce, prohibit any construction within the disputed property area, and launch an investigation into potential abuse of power by the HOA president." "Second," Patricia said immediately. "We cannot vote on this without proper procedure," Wendy protested. "Actually, we can," James said, pulling out his own copy of the HOA bylaws. "Emergency motions can be called when property rights are at stake. I am calling for an emergency vote." The vote was swift and decisive. Harold, Patricia, and James voted to rescind my fine, prohibit the deck construction in its current plan, and investigate Wendy's conduct. The fifth board member, a quiet woman named Susan who had barely spoken, abstained. Wendy voted against, but she was outnumbered. "This is not over," Wendy hissed as the meeting dissolved into chaos around her. "I will sue the HOA. I will sue all of you." "Try it," Rachel said coolly. "I look forward to discovery, where we can subpoena all your HOA communications and decisions for the past 8 years. Wendy grabbed her things and stormed out, slamming the community center door so hard the windows rattled. After the meeting, dozens of neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Wendy. Many of them shared more stories, and I started to realize just how toxic her leadership had been. Rachel took notes on everything, building a case. That evening, I finally felt like I could breathe. The immediate crisis was over. The deck construction was permanently halted, my bogus fine was rescinded, and Wendy's power was crumbling. But I should have known she was not done yet. Sunday morning, I woke to find my mailbox had been vandalized. It was not just knocked over, it had been completely destroyed, bent and twisted like someone had attacked it with a baseball bat. I filed a police report, though I had no proof who did it. Monday brought a new development. I received a certified letter from an attorney representing Wendy. She was suing me personally for defamation, harassment, and interference with property rights. The lawsuit was ridiculous, claiming I had damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. Rachel read the lawsuit and actually laughed. "This is a slap suit. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. She is trying to punish you for speaking out. Arizona has anti-slap laws. We can get this dismissed and possibly recover attorney's fees." "How long will that take?" I asked wearily. "A few months, but do not worry. This lawsuit has no merit." The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal documents and HOA drama. The board launched a formal investigation into Wendy's conduct, reviewing 8 years of decisions, fines, and communications. What they found was damning. Wendy had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, not huge amounts, but consistent small withdrawals for things like lunches, gas, and even a vacation to California that she claimed was for an HOA conference that did not exist. She had been issuing fines arbitrarily, often targeting people she personally disliked. She'd approved her own home improvements without proper board votes, and most disturbingly, she had been collecting money from several neighbors for special assessments that were never properly documented or deposited into the HOA account. The board called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Wendy as president. The vote was 4-0 with Wendy absent. They also voted to file a formal complaint with law enforcement regarding the missing funds. That was when things got really serious. The Scottsdale Police Department sent a detective to investigate. His name was Detective Martinez, and he was thorough. He interviewed board members, reviewed financial records, and talked to neighbors who had paid Wendy directly for various assessments. I gave him copies of everything I had documented, including Wendy's threatening notes and the timeline of retaliation against me. He took it all seriously. "This looks like embezzlement and possibly fraud," Detective Martinez told me during one of our conversations. "The amounts are not huge, but it adds up to several $1,000s over the years. Combined with the abuse of power and attempted construction on your property, she could face criminal charges." "I just wanted her to stay off my land," I said. "I did not expect all this." "That is how these things go," he said. "You pull one thread and the whole sweater unravels." 3 weeks after the initial board meeting, Wendy was arrested. The charges included embezzlement, fraud, and trespassing. The trespassing charge specifically related to her attempt to build on my property without permission. I was not there when they arrested her, but I heard about it from multiple neighbors. Apparently, she screamed that she was being persecuted, that the HOA had turned against her, that I had orchestrated some kind of conspiracy to destroy her life. The local news picked up the story. "HOA president arrested for embezzlement" was the headline in the Scottsdale Tribune. My name was kept out of it, thankfully, but the story detailed years of abuse and financial misconduct. Wendy's lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could not refile it. The judge ruled it was a clear slap suit and ordered her to pay my attorney's fees. That added another $8,000 to her legal troubles. The HOA held elections for a new president. Patricia won easily, promising transparency and accountability. One of her first acts was to apologize formally to all the neighbors who had been unfairly fined or harassed under Wendy's leadership. As for the deck, that was never built. Wendy's house went up for sale 2 months after her arrest. She was facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits from the HOA and multiple neighbors, and bankruptcy. The house sold quickly, and she moved out of state before her trial. I later heard through the legal grapevine that she took a plea deal. She pled guilty to reduced charges, paid restitution to the HOA and affected neighbors, and received probation. The terms of her probation included staying away from Scottsdale and never serving on an HOA board again. As for me, life in Meadowbrook Estates actually became pleasant. Patricia ran the HOA with common sense and fairness. The arbitrary fines stopped. The harassment ended. Neighbors who had been afraid to talk to each other started having block parties and cookouts. I installed a new mailbox, sturdier than the last one. I also installed security cameras around my property, just in case. But there were no more incidents. One evening, about 6 months after everything started, I was sitting on my back porch with a cold beer, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. My neighbor on the other side, an accountant named Robert, came over to chat. "You know, Adrian, I've been meaning to thank you," he said. "A lot of us wanted to stand up to Wendy over the years, but we were afraid. You did it, and it freed all of us." "I just did not want her building on my property," I said with a shrug. "It was more than that, though," Robert insisted. "You stood up for what was right even when she tried to crush you for it. That took guts." Maybe it did. Or maybe I was just stubborn. Either way, I was glad it was over. The surveyor stakes marking my property line were still in place, bright orange and impossible to miss. No one would ever build 3 feet onto my property again. I thought about Wendy sometimes, wondering what drove someone to abuse a little bit of power so completely. Was it ego, control, some deep insecurity that made her need to dominate her neighbors? I would never know. What I did know was that the system, for all its flaws, had worked. When I documented everything, stood firm on my rights, and refused to be bullied, justice prevailed. It took time, money, and stress, but it worked. The HOA's official removal order for Wendy's deck construction had come in 7 days after that initial confrontation, just as Rachel had promised. But the real victory took months. It took community organizing, legal action, police investigation, and neighbors finding their voices. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that documentation is everything. I learned that bullies rely on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. I learned that standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. and I learned that even in a HOA-controlled subdivision, property rights still matter. The new HOA board was nothing like Wendy's reign. Patricia instituted regular financial audits, required board votes on all significant decisions, and created an appeals process for fines. She also organized quarterly meetings where any resident could bring concerns without fear of retaliation. It was amazing what happened when an HOA actually served the community instead of the president's ego. My attorney, Rachel, became a good friend. She handled a few more issues for me over the years, though nothing as dramatic as the Wendy situation. She said my case had become legendary in HOA law circles, a cautionary tale about abuse of power and a roadmap for how to fight back. The property where Wendy tried to build her deck remained empty, a strip of grass between our houses. Sometimes I thought about building a fence there, just to make the property line absolutely clear. But I never did. The surveyor's stakes were enough. I did plant some desert willows along the property line, though. They grew quickly in the Arizona climate, their purple flowers beautiful in the spring. They were a living reminder of boundaries, growth, and the importance of standing your ground. Life moved on. I got a promotion at work, traveled a bit, dated a teacher named Sarah who lived 2 neighborhoods over. The Meadowbrook Estates community thrived under new leadership. Property values actually went up once word spread that the toxic HOA president was gone. I ran into Patricia at the grocery store one day, about a year after everything had settled. She was loading vegetables into her cart and looked genuinely happy. "Adrian, how are you?" she asked warmly. "Good, really good. How are things going with the HOA?" She grinned. "Smooth as butter. We have not had a single serious complaint in months. People are actually enjoying living here now. Who knew that treating residents with respect would work out so well?" "Revolutionary concept," I said dryly. "You should run for the board," she suggested. "We could use someone with your backbone." I laughed. "No thanks. I have had enough HOA drama for a lifetime." "Fair enough," she conceded. "But seriously, thank you again. You changed this community for the better." After she left, I stood in the produce aisle thinking about her words. I had not set out to change anything. I just wanted to protect my property. But sometimes that is how change happens. One person says no when everyone else has been saying yes out of fear, and suddenly the whole dynamic shifts. The criminal case against Wendy concluded quietly. She served no jail time due to the plea deal, but she had to pay back over $15,000 in restitution when everything was totaled up. Her attorney's fees probably cost her even more. Her reputation was destroyed, at least in Scottsdale. I wondered sometimes if she learned anything from the experience, or if she just felt victimized by the people who finally stood up to her. Probably the latter. People like Wendy rarely accept responsibility for their actions. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem now was deciding whether to plant some saguaro cacti in my front yard and wondering if Sarah wanted to come over for dinner on Friday night. Normal problems, good problems. The security cameras I had installed captured some interesting wildlife footage at night. Javelinas wandering through the yard, a coyote passing by once, countless rabbits and quail. I even caught a bobcat one night, moving like a shadow through my back garden. It reminded me that we were living in the desert, in wild country, and that HOA rules were just human constructs on top of something much bigger and more real. Desert willows do not care about property lines or HOA regulations. They just grow where they are planted, reaching toward the sun. Maybe there was a lesson in that. 2 years after the deck incident, as I started calling it, I refinanced my house. The property value had increased significantly, partly due to the market, but also due to the neighborhood's improved reputation. The appraiser who came out mentioned that he had heard about the HOA situation. "This neighborhood is known for having one of the better-run HOAs in Scottsdale now," he told me. "That adds value. People are willing to pay more to live somewhere without constant drama and arbitrary rules." "It was not always that way," I said. "I heard. You were involved in that whole mess with the previous president, right?" I nodded. "I was." "Well, you did everyone a favor. HOA horror stories are a dime a dozen in this town. It is nice when there's a story about things getting better instead of worse." After he left, I sat on my back porch again, beer in hand, looking at those desert willows that now stood 8 feet tall. Their roots ran deep, probably spreading under where Wendy's deck would have been if I had not stopped it. I thought about all the what-ifs. What if I had not woken up when the construction started? What if I had been intimidated by Wendy's threats? What if the other board members had not supported me? What if the neighbors had not found the courage to speak up? Any one of those things going differently could have changed the outcome. I might have ended up with a deck permanently encroaching on my property, setting a precedent for the HOA to run roughshod over property rights whenever convenient. Other neighbors might have continued suffering under Wendy's arbitrary rule. The embezzlement might have continued unchecked. Instead, everything had worked out about as well as it could have. Justice prevailed. The community healed. Life went on. Sometimes I drove past Wendy's old house, now occupied by a young couple with 2 kids. They seemed happy, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded before they arrived. They waved when they saw me, and I waved back. Their kids played basketball in the driveway with a hoop that was definitely over the approved height, and nobody cared because Patricia was not a tyrant. That was how it should be. HOAs exist to maintain property values and handle common areas, not to micromanage every detail of people's lives. It took a crisis to get Meadowbrook Estates back to that simple truth, but we got there. I eventually did go on that date with Sarah, and it went well. She had her own HOA horror story from a previous place she lived, a condo where the board tried to ban pets retroactively even though half the residents had dogs or cats. She had been part of the group that fought back and won. We bonded over our shared experience of standing up to petty tyrants. "Why do you think people get that way?" she asked over dinner. "Like your HOA president or my condo board? What makes someone abuse such a tiny amount of power?" "I've thought about that a lot," I admitted. "I think some people feel powerless in their real lives, so when they get any authority at all, they go overboard. Or maybe they are just bullies who finally found a legal framework to bully people within." "That is depressing," Sarah said. "But it is also empowering," I countered, "because it means they only have power if we give it to them. The moment we stand up and say no, their whole house of cards collapses. Wendy seemed invincible until people challenged her. Then she fell apart." Sarah raised her wine glass. "To standing up to bullies." I clinked my beer bottle against her glass. "To standing up to bullies." It became something of a philosophy for me after that. In work situations, in social dynamics, in every part of life, I found myself more willing to push back against unreasonable demands or unfair treatment. The Wendy situation had taught me that standing your ground, documenting everything, and refusing to be intimidated actually works. Not every situation worked out as well as that one did, of course. Real life is messy and complicated. But I found that more often than not, bullies backed down when confronted with someone who would not yield. The HOA meetings under Patricia's leadership were almost boring compared to the Wendy era, and I meant that as the highest compliment. They discussed budgets for landscaping, scheduled pool maintenance, and handled the occasional legitimate complaint about noise or parking. No drama, no threats, no abuse of power. I attended meetings occasionally, just to stay informed and show support for the new board. Patricia always looked happy to see engaged residents instead of fearful ones. At one meeting, about 3 years after everything went down, a new resident raised a question about property line disputes. He was considering adding a fence and wanted to make sure he did everything correctly. Patricia immediately referred him to the county surveyor's office and recommended he get a proper survey before any construction. "We learned that lesson the hard way," she said with a meaningful glance at me. "Always verify property lines before building anything near them." The new resident looked confused, not knowing the history. An older neighbor leaned over and whispered something to him. His eyes went wide and he nodded seriously. After the meeting, he approached me. "You are the guy, right? The one who stood up to the crazy president." I shrugged. "I just protected my property." "Well, I'm glad you did. This neighborhood has a great reputation now. That is one reason we bought here." It was strange being known for that, but not in a bad way. It reminded me that actions have consequences, hopefully positive ones. My relationship with Sarah progressed. She moved in after a year of dating, and we talked about marriage. She loved the house, loved the neighborhood, and got along great with all the neighbors who had become friends rather than just people living nearby. We hosted a cookout one summer evening, inviting the whole street. 20 people showed up, more than I had ever socialized with before all the HOA drama. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, the kids played in the sprinklers, and adults talked and laughed in the Arizona evening heat. Patricia pulled me aside at one point. "You know what this is?" she asked, gesturing at the happy crowd. "A cookout?" "Community," she corrected. "Real community. Not the fake kind enforced by fines and fear, but actual neighbors who like each other. That is what we were supposed to be all along." She was right. This was what Meadowbrook Estates was meant to be. A place where people chose to live, not just because of property values, but because they genuinely enjoyed the community. Robert, my accountant neighbor, clinked his beer bottle against mine. "To Adrian, the man who killed tyranny with a survey." Everyone laughed and raised their drinks. It was embarrassing and heartwarming at the same time. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Sarah and I were cleaning up, she asked me if I ever regretted how everything went down. Regret it? No, why would I? Well, it was months of stress, legal bills, police investigations. You could have just ignored it, maybe let her build the deck and fought about it later, or even just accepted it. I shook my head firmly. If I had done that, she would still be running this place into the ground. Other neighbors would still be getting harassed, and I would have permanently lost 3 feet of my property because I was too tired or scared to stand up for myself. No, I do not regret it at all. "Good," Sarah said, kissing my cheek, "because I am proud of you." Those words meant more than she probably knew. The desert willows bloomed again that spring, their purple flowers attracting hummingbirds and bees. I sat on my porch watching them, remembering that morning 3 years ago when construction equipment woke me up and changed everything. It was funny how life works sometimes. One person's attempt to steal 3 feet of land had sparked a complete transformation of an entire community. Wendy's greed and arrogance had been her downfall, but they had been our catalyst for positive change. I did not hate Wendy, not anymore. I barely thought about her most days. She was just a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when small amounts of power go to someone's head and when nobody stands up to stop it. The surveyor's stakes were still there, faded now, but still visible. I had kind of grown attached to them, those bright orange markers of boundaries and justice. Every time I saw them, I remembered what I had learned about standing firm, documenting everything, and refusing to be bullied. Sarah and I got married that fall in a small ceremony in our backyard, right next to those desert willows. The whole neighborhood was invited, and most of them came. Patricia officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. It was simple and perfect, surrounded by the community that had emerged from the ashes of Wendy's tyrannical reign. During the reception, Harold, the retired dentist from the HOA board, made a toast. To Adrian and Sarah, and to the reminder that standing up for what is right, even in small things, can change everything. Everyone cheered. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, my friends, my community, and felt grateful for that morning 3 years ago when I refused to let someone build 3 feet onto my property. It seemed like such a small thing, 3 feet of land, but those 3 feet represented something much bigger. Property rights, personal boundaries, the rule of law, the importance of standing up to bullies. All of that had been wrapped up in a deck that was never built, and a HOA president who fell from power. The removal order had come in 7 days, just as promised, but the real victory took much longer. It took documentation, legal action, community organizing, police investigation, and neighbors finding the courage to speak up. It took months of stress and uncertainty and fear that maybe I would lose. Maybe Wendy would find a way to crush me like she had crushed others before. But I had not been crushed. Neither had the community. We had all emerged stronger, more connected, more willing to stand up for ourselves and each other. As the sun set on my wedding day, painting the sky in those brilliant Arizona colors, I stood next to Sarah looking out at my property. My property, every inch of it clearly defined and protected. The desert willows swayed in the evening breeze, their roots deep in soil that was entirely mine. Life in Meadowbrook Estates was good now. The HOA functioned as it should, serving the community rather than ruling it. Property values were up, but more importantly, quality of life was up. People were happy here. They chose to be here, not just because they had invested in real estate, but because this was a genuine community worth being part of. And it all started because I refused to let Karren build a deck 3 feet over my property line, and because the removal order came in 7 days, setting off a chain of events that transformed everything. Sometimes standing up for yourself is about more than just yourself. Sometimes it is about everyone around you who is too afraid to stand up themselves. Sometimes 3 feet of land represents the difference between justice and tyranny, between community and fear, between doing what is right and accepting what is wrong. I learned that lesson well, and I never forgot it. Neither did anyone else in Meadowbrook Estates. The story of Wendy, the HOA president, and her illegal deck became neighborhood legend, passed on to new residents as a reminder of where we had been and how far we had come. The surveyor's stakes remained in place, monuments to boundaries respected, and justice served. The desert willows grew taller each year, beautiful and resilient. And life went on, better than it had been before, all because someone finally said no to a bully with a clipboard and a God complex. That was my story. That was how I learned that 3 feet can matter more than anyone expects, and how the removal order that came in 7 days changed not just my property line, but an entire community's future.